What makes a video game good? Is it a world full of wonder, a tight and rewarding gameplay loop, a memorable cast of characters? Or is it novelty, the imperfect but noble execution of new ideas, or iterating on old ones with undeniable refinement? Is it great performances or unparalleled art direction, or a story that challenges you and sits with you as the credits roll? Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is without a doubt a good video game. In fact, it's a great video game. Even beyond that, the true allure of Expedition 33 is that it is championed as one of the greatest games ever made. A game that swept the 2025 Game Awards, winning 9 of its 13 nominations and standing tall as the most awarded title in the show's history since its inception in 2014. Not stopping there, it went on to win Game of the Year at 5 other major award shows. This run of accolades is unprecedented, truly an astounding feat and rightfully lauded for the message it sends. A turn-based action-infused JRPG that embraces its classic inspirations while synthesizing something new. Developed by Sandfall Interactive, a small indie team based in Montpellier, France. It's that familiar, hard-hitting underdog story, punching way above its weight and standing victorious over its competition. Hailed as a great shift, a herald of change, a new standard to live up to. Expedition 33 is beyond beautiful to look at, bursting with content, yet restrained in its scale to deliver a tight, focused experience, one that rewards and respects your time without patronizing you with hand-holding or endless grinding. It is a true double-A behemoth, coming out the gate hard and fast and batting in the big leagues, rightfully earning its reputation. But that is a substantial legacy, looming large as the paintress lording over her dominion from afar. How good can it be, really? That was a question that echoed through my mind as I made my way through the winding streets of Lorien, out into that beautiful, broken continent, piecing together the fraying threads of this story and navigated this surprisingly poignant tale of grief, choice, and the weight we all carry together. My eagerness to tackle this game was tempered by a sense of trepidation, curious to see whether this acclaimed masterpiece would measure up under scrutiny, but also just wanting to enjoy a good old-fashioned video game. A complete player-focused package, one that doesn't try to deceive or manipulate. A growing rarity in a space dominated by greed and rampant anti-consumer practices. At the heart of Expedition 33, though, is a single burning question. What is more important, essence or verisimilitude? Across its many systems, it untangles this mystery, torn in different directions at different points. It's a game that does almost everything right on paper, polished to a respectable luster given its resources. Yet there's something about it that stops me from embracing it fully, despite my appreciation of its undeniably fantastic traits. It's this tension that interests me most, a game that categorically delivers on all fronts and oozes of charisma, but I find it searching for a certain roughness, a certain charm to bring it all together. I want this to be a balanced take on this monumental game, not for the sake of being contrarian, but to investigate how and why it soars in some aspects and grates on me in others. This friction is something that I can't ignore, and the solid month I spent with this game has left me equally impressed and drained, and I want to know why. As usual, this video is part retrospective, part critique, but more importantly, it's a love letter to a game that many consider to be one of the greatest of all time. I want to discover for myself where its true heart lies, somewhere between its massive shadow that towers over everything, and the tangled knot of themes and systems deep at its root. This unknowable monolith calls to me, and I must answer it with curiosity of my own, and face this painted spectre for myself. After everything, we continue. After everything, tomorrow comes. This is why I can't stop thinking about Clair Obscur Expedition 33.
Dim, dam, dadilam, vacarme, s'en va dans l'oubli éternam, et Gustave dom guardeam, dilim, didididilam, lutessera dodilom, seram, dim, dim, da, 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 dim, da, 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 dim, da, di, dam, dim, dim, da, 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 dim, da, 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 dim, da, di, dam. Dans là-haut sera ravi, les toits à sur noir gris fera. Clair obscur, trouble de rature, trouvera effet. Clair obscur, bordé aux peintures, trouvera sans elle. Clair obscur, trouble de rature, trouvera effet. Clair obscur, bordé aux peintures, trouvera sans elle. obscur, trouble-rature, clair obscur, guardé aux peintures. Clair obscur, trouble de rature, courera et fait. Clair obscur, guardé aux peintures, trouvera sans aile.
Welcome to Lumiere, a beautifully ruined version of Paris, a beacon of life at the far edge of a fractured world, steeped in a dark fantasy Belle Epoque aesthetic. We play as Gustave, a ruggedly handsome inventor who has spent the better part of his life progressing the city's sciences through engineering and innovation. He looks out at the Monolith, the stone obelisk looming large in the distance, in the colossal form of the paintress, sitting against it, hugging her knees, face buried, a cruel goddess unwilling to look upon the destruction she heralds for the inhabitants of this world. In the universe of Clair Obscur, the number etched on that cursed monument has been counting down with each passing year, with its dwindling digits marking the age of those whose death draws near. When the time comes for it to tick down, the paintress unfurls herself from a crying position, stands up, and paints a new number, reducing those unfortunate souls to a swirl of roses, erasing them from existence in an unavoidable event that has come to be known as the gommage. This unassailable fact forms the tragic bottom line of this world, where death is not just quickening and inevitable, but life itself is cut short. Humanity is being choked and forced to stare down its own doom, with each new life given less and less time to live. Less time with your family, with your loved ones, with your child or brother or sister or husband or wife. There's never enough time. Why bring more life into this miserable existence? This solemn question doesn't just hang in the air, but mindlessly rests its crushing weight down on the people tired of bearing it. Gustave throws a stone at the paintress, so far beyond his reach it's unfathomable. This symbol of everything wrong with this world, unnatural in its declining state. Despite this hopelessness, there is something bright within Gustave, and his scientific mind looking towards the future, no matter how bleak. His adopted sister Maelle finds him looking out at the paintress, and urges him to seek out and say goodbye to his ex-girlfriend Sophie. Today, the ominous 34 on the monolith will soon be erased. As Gustave reconciles with Sophie and they spend their time wandering through the streets of Lumiere, this especially bleak scene is overlaid with a veneer of celebration and festivities, the natural coping mechanism of a reality where premature loss has become the norm. This will be the 77th gommage since the fabled fracture, and Lumiere has learned to find light together, to laugh, to love, to say goodbye in whatever way they can. Yet there is a quiet wrath that permeates the crowded streets, the hanging banners and performances unable to dress this tragedy up adequately. Children will be orphaned, couples will be widowed, siblings gone and families decimated. This is the harsh and sober dawn that awaits when the sun goes down and a new number is painted on the monolith. Gustave and Sophie mend their relationship in the shadow of this cataclysm, a grave reminder that time is all we really have, and time with each other is something precious, where all transgressions and past mistakes ought to be forgiven. The two look upon the setting sun, surrounded by so many other similar stories, all staring out at the fate that awaits them, whether to vanish from this world entirely or the impending grief of being left behind. This gommage scene is brilliantly directed and showcases the expedition's best quality. Its dedication to a romantic maximalism that swells and erupts with emotion, uncompromising in its depiction of harrowing pain contrasted against an ethereal beauty, as the paintress gets up and paints that dreaded new number. People watch on, preparing for the unpreparable, in awe or resignation or anger, as skin and limb and longing gazes of love peel off into soft red petals, rather than the expected ash and dust. As if sundered by a gust of wind, the gommage are blown into the air, the physical forms of their bodies broken apart into a soft flowery swirl as they dissipate organically into the ether, their chroma, their life force returning to its source. There doesn't seem to be physical pain or suffering in this event, but the act of departure hurts all the same. In romantic fashion, Sophie's the last to go, a disappearance supernaturally extended as if to buy her and Gustave more time. But it's ultimately futile as she flickers out of existence, wordlessly, her essence drifting into the sky back towards the monolith. A new number, 33, is brushed into the obelisk as the paintress returns to her grim position at its base, and Gustave and so many others are left to linger in the first stifled breaths of their new reality. This is where our story truly begins. Rather than sitting on their laurels and waiting for the inevitable, Lumiere immediately readies itself to launch the next group of expeditioners out onto the continent, with the simple goal of neutralizing the paintress, in a vain hope that this would stop the mass extinction she inflicts with the stroke of a brush. This is Expedition 33, and Gustav, wanting to spend his final year doing what he can, is ready for whatever comes next. On the docks, preparing to set out, Maelle joins him, herself only 16 years old, but resigned to the fact that there is nothing for her here in Lumiere. Like many, she is determined to put an end to the Paintress herself, despite the seemingly futile nature of their goal, with so many attempts before them resulting in failure. Expedition 33 sets out, hopping onto their ship and sailing out into the unknown, beyond the safety of Lumiere's waning light. As you can see with your own eyes, Expedition 33 is a breathtakingly beautiful game, not just from the loaded narrative that spins about this core of overwhelming grief and poetic tragedy, but also the artistic direction in terms of cutscenes and visuals. It throws us directly into this viscerally rendered world, where every moment you put down the controller could be turned into a wallpaper, a quality that persists throughout the entire experience of playing it. The scenes between characters, even this early on, feel considered and realistic, despite an obvious AA feel with some uncanny models and facial animations. These limitations are painted over by the fantastic performances, with the voice actors really flexing their stuff and elevating each scene. This surprising polish also extends to the general movement and controls, from the quick unlimited sprint to responsive grappling to the lack of fall damage, to even jumping and momentum all feeling refined, with little friction to embracing them. The first taste of combat as well seamlessly codifies its initial turn-based rhythm, spliced in with some real-time elements like shooting, dodging, and parrying. I chose to play on expert difficulty, which as the game and this video goes on will make me question my sanity at many points. But this first impression of the general combat did set the right tone, introducing a fresh spin that evokes old-school Final Fantasy while rewarding quick reflexes with its parry system. Once again, these dichotomous elements will eventually boil over into a unique frustration, but that's a thread we will develop as we go on. For now, the expedition, still reeling from the gamage but with their eyes set firmly on securing a future for those who come after, wash ashore on a foggy, desolate beach. And immediately the game's atmosphere takes a wild swing into something akin to a war film. Upon landing, the apprehensive explorers are approached by an old man with a cane, his hair graying with a scar on his eye. This uncanny sight is enough to bewilder the expedition, but it's this mystery man's unrelenting violence that terrifies them, as he slices the commander in half without hesitation. This first contact spirals into catastrophe as the crew are overwhelmed by these grotesque hand creatures, known as Nevrons, obliterating their numbers with ease and picking them out like prey in the fog of war. Gustav is shell-shocked by this sudden decimation, the hopeful, optimistic mood of their adventure completely subverted by true terror, as his allies and friends are killed in front of him without recourse. This tonal whiplash is a testament to Expedition 33's commitment to storytelling, bubbling with a sort of experimentation and boldness that never lets you sit comfortably for too long. This beach scene is so effective that when Gustav wakes up alone in a serene meadow, miraculously surviving the encounter, you can vividly feel the emotional pain he is racked with. That childish mantra to carry on no matter what, reduced to mere spiritless words. So when he stumbles across the mound of corpses from a previous expedition, calcified and crushed by the weight of their collective failures, Gustav sits down, alone, surrounded by ghosts. He is tired, so absolutely demoralized by his own failure, so ashamed of his expedition's rapid and ineluctable defeat by the forces of this cruel world, that he materializes his pistol, raises it to his temple, and shuts his eyes. This depiction of overwhelming grief, that massive swing from high to low, makes this moment truly difficult to watch. There's a sorrowful side as Gustav makes peace with his choice, only to be interrupted by the voice of a woman, who beckons him to get up. He turns to see Lune, a stoic, pragmatic determination displayed across her face, unrelenting not in its positivity but in a no-nonsense desire to see things through. The two stand together as they fight off the encroaching Nevrons, uniting to bring back this almost failed expedition from its untimely extinction. These two form the initial core of your party, Gustav and Lune, the former sensitive and optimistic, the latter dour and practical, the two having shared some romance in their past life in Lumiere, which is so far from where they are now on these alien shores. This first act of the game, as you would expect, is driven primarily by rebuilding the expedition and pressing onward towards the Monolith. The game eases you into its world, which consists mainly of linear dungeons with a few branching pathways that reward thorough exploration. This beautiful corridor design reminds me most of Final Fantasy X, in that each area you step into still feels vast, a testament to the environmental diversity, astounding visuals, and keen implementation of scale and verticality. It is just open enough to entice you down different paths, without always knowing if you are on the primary track, which magnifies the perceived scope of the zone while gently pushing you to comb every corner. Generally, I'm a fan of this type of level design since it recognizes and rewards your instinct to be meticulous as a player, while not going overboard and overwhelming you with too much choice. Each dungeon has paths that fold upon each other, shortcuts in the form of ropes to kick down, climbable handholds that smartly introduce elevation, and are also nicely explained within the lore as part of a previous expedition's attempt to connect the world and make navigation easier. Beyond these elements of construction, what really ties them together is the commitment to visuals. Sandfall Interactive's eye for framing and color is both commendable and consistent, with each dungeon drawing your eye to its central motif, whether that be structurally with recognizable architecture or stony formations or natural splendor. Again and again, I was taken aback by the sheer beauty on display each time you step into a level, demonstrating a masterful approach to sumptuous spectacle, confidently dressing up simple yet effective level design. Some of the environments that stood out to me the most in my playthrough were the Stone Wave Cliffs, the island of Cyrene, and the Monolith itself, flooring me with their majestic vistas and unmatched diversity, with very little repetition in visual design across the game's many dungeons. It is clear that the developers very intentionally varied their choice of environments, and I can't imagine how much concept art and iteration was needed to bring this assortment of unique locales to life. That said, however, the game's use of Unreal Engine 5, with its often gaudy graphical fidelity, constant shimmering, and standardized, sometimes sterile feel, does unfortunately clash with this handcrafted world. It is not a new or novel argument to propose that a game's memorable aesthetic often comes from a combination of its art direction and limitations of its engine, choosing to render things artistically in essence rather than verisimilitude. The act of painting can sacrifice pure fidelity for mood and impressionistic ideals. Likewise, the act of depicting worlds in 3D space, as this game does so well, can also be overloaded with detail in a way that actually creates distance between viewer and object. Expedition's undisputed art direction is realized through UE5's sheer fidelity. Every rock and tree an asset, every brick and blade of grass in the right spot to convey its many picture-perfect scenes with shocking consistency. Like I alluded to earlier, this is one of those games where every frame is a painting. Yet, there is a creeping notion of unreality, when the undeniable sheen of UE5 is so omnipresent and coats everything with a certain waxiness that it saturates the world of Expedition 33, pushing it toward that dreaded tech demo feel. So graphically dense, so painstakingly rendered, so perfectly portrayed that it becomes hard to focus your eyes on its resplendent direction alone. Its smoothing over of all blemishes stops you from filling in the space with your own imagination, and thus solidifying it in your memory. Ultimately, this small team's commitment to and skilled use of this robust established engine is the right call. Beyond the familiar anti-aliasing and somewhat bland construction, Sandfall definitely delivers on their detailed vision, though it's clear that some charm is lost along the way. The essence of their vibrant art direction is sometimes stifled by the sanding down of all rough edges by UE5's heavy hand. This objection, that something of absolute frictionless beauty can somehow become distracting, is one that actually rears its head throughout this entire game. But to stay on the graphics for now, this UE5 aesthetics is perhaps most glaring in the character models, with Maelle and Ciel being the biggest offenders, especially with their samey faces. There's something so utterly generic with Maelle's design that it betrays how significant of a character she eventually becomes, while with Ciel I was genuinely surprised when she joined the team because of how uninspired and ordinary she seemed. Gustave and Lune have less of an issue in this department, due to their more diverse looks from facial features to hair and proportion. Luckily, hairstyles for each character can be changed, a cosmetic that can be discovered, bought, or earned throughout your journey. I immediately felt inclined to cut Maelle's hair short in Act 1 to make her stand out more, almost out of respect to her character and arc, since her default appearance just felt so bland and soulless in cutscenes. This UE5 face problem seems minor, but with the significant weight placed on cinematics in this game, it's enough to warrant some criticism, since so much of your emotional investment relies on the performances of these characters, both in terms of animation and voice. Fortunately, the cast of voice actors here is absolutely phenomenal, with Charlie Cox as Gustave, Jennifer English as Maelle, Kirsty Ryder as Lune, and Charlotte Nix as Ciel, all delivering and making each character in the party stand out and apart. Speaking of characters, let's do a brief introduction of each to catch us up to speed. Gustave, our clear protagonist, is an engineer and inventor in Lumiere, handsome, well-spoken, and defined by his cheery attitude and unexpected optimism in the face of this cruel world. He embodies a relaxed, gentlemanly swagger, a romantic, sensitive demeanor that aligns him more towards a creative artist rather than a man of science. He has a softness to him that is endearing, which is contrasted nicely by his playstyle, where you build charges on his mechanical arm before launching an explosive overcharge attack. a technique that becomes symbolic of his emotional disposition. Gustav is the type to let things simmer and grow before lashing out, for better or for worse. It is a trait that makes him rash and dramatic, but also a capable and inspiring leader. Lune, on the other hand, is the group's voice of reason. Externally, she is cold and calculating, always running the numbers in her head. Daughter to parents who were obsessed with finding a solution to the world's looming extinction, she slavishly served their goals, shouldering the burden and viewing herself as their last hope, their backup plan to continue their work, to leave a legacy. She is a researcher consumed by her dedication to the mission, which is made richer by her affinity for music and song and dance, as well as the elemental magic she wields as a mage. The desire to be free of this expectation manifests in her artistic expression, wanting to align her different selves. Her playstyle revolves around generating elemental stains from formidable spells, and then consuming them for devastating effect. The flowy movements and dance's fluidity she demonstrates while casting this magic feels intrinsic to her character, and her beauty complements this repressed, sardonic personality. Maelle is the youngest of the group, an exceptional fighter who feels more at home out here than she did back in Lumiere. After her parents got merged, she was left orphaned and Gustav's family took her in, raising her as their own. To this effect, Gustav is basically her older brother, but sometimes her uncle or even her dad. Even to her, the relation is confusing. Gustav and Lune find her in a mysterious mansion deep in the heart of the Flying Waters, where she is being protected by an enigmatic spectre known as the Curator. She has an innocence and naivete to her, expected from her age, but this is contrasted by her highly competent fencing playstyle, focused on agility and burst damage, switching between stances in a dynamic and fast-paced rhythm. This active, limber moveset makes Maelle immediately engage into play, and she joins Gustav and Lune as they forge onwards, her reintroduction rounding out this initial party of three. After being led to the gestural village by a little fella named Nocco, the trio come across Ciel, another survivor from the 33 who has somehow landed here in this gladiatorial arena. Ciel is most reminiscent of the dragoon gambler archetype, lively and outspoken, much less reserved and always adopting a more casual, laid-back tone. As we learn later, she carries a lot of trauma, having lost her husband Pierre to an unfortunate incident rather than a gommage, and a grief driving her to take her own life, unaware of the unborn child inside of her. This heavy weight is compensated by her vibrant, flirty personality, never taking anything too seriously. This free-spirited facade is embodied by her gameplay mechanic, involving cards and building stacks of sun and moon charges, before entering Twilight to dish out heavy damage. This gambit-focused gameplay revolving around dark damage and support spells is subtle storytelling, and positions her nicely as a jack-of-all-trades in the team. With our party of four gathered, Gustav, Lune, Maelle, and Ciel are what remains of Expedition 33, and the core cast of this underdog story, as these brave warriors set their eyes on the seemingly insurmountable task ahead of slaying the Paintress. But first they must make their way across this broken world. Stepping out of the Spring Meadows, we are introduced to the game's overworld, also known as the Continent. Expedition's mainline and side dungeons are all connected by this unexpected yet gracefully executed world map. This quickly becomes one of the game's most recognizable and lauded traits, for its incredible visuals, considered design, and excellent use of scale. The diorama-esque presentation with the shrunken down versions of landmarks and vistas, the pulled back perspective highlighting little characters and groups of enemies, the excellent use of color and natural formations that feel tangible and vibrant. Stepping out into the overworld satisfies that much anticipated feelings of exploring the world writ large. Straight away, you are introduced to different types of portals that you can enter. Some lead to these serene dioramas, quiet and awash with atmosphere, little vignettes of larger environments that hold useful resources or collectibles. These small vistas peppered across the field are a welcome addition, since they give you a moment to breathe and admire and provide relief from challenge, ruminating in the tragic solitude of this broken reality. On the other hand, you have your classic optional activities and dungeons that demand much more from you, whether through exploration or fights against beefed up enemies. These are small in number in this first act of the game, which prevents you from being overwhelmed and gently railroads you toward the next story beats. These minimized field elements combine to communicate a grander, comforting map, one that successfully translates the scale of this vast concrete space and serves as a fantastic and necessary joiner that gives the game its quintessential JRPG feel. Visually, it reminds me a lot of the handcrafted 3D style of Hironobu Sakaguchi's Fantasian, with its unique use of models and physical structures. At this point, all we can really do is sprint around its expansive spaces with our little steps, though we will eventually gain the ability to explore by sea and by air. The map will continue to open up as you move through the game, becoming the main signifier of progression through both size and traversal options. But now, the path is relatively linear, and the expeditioners make their way towards SKA's nest, when they come across the odd and rotund creature, a gigantic goon bag with a strange mask for a face. The most incredible part of SKA's design, however, is his booming voice. There's just something so comforting about the way SKA speaks, with his slow drawl and simple but precise use of language. He looks, acts, and talks like a kid's toy, like an imaginary friend, a surprising beacon of humor and lightheartedness in a stunning yet dreary world. It is simple fun to watch him sit comfortably in his pool and argue one-sidedly with his best friend and neighbor Francois, who by contrast speaks with a cutting and verbose tone, and is also reminiscent of a child's drawing in the form of a rock with a face. SKA beseeches you to find a special stone so that he can fly you directly to the paintress, joining your party as your mount, which was not at all what I expected. I like that he sometimes goes, "I am speed," as you zip around on his back. Having recruited this new strange friend, the team sets out for the Stone Wave Cliffs to find his precious rock, as we move towards the climax of Act 1. Before that, however, let's talk a bit more about the combat of Expedition 33. While the game is often lauded for its narrative, its specific take on combat is the other sizable side of that coin, and is equally essential to this game's claim to fame. Ostensibly a turn-based RPG with a traditional party system, the game incorporates various elements of real-time action combat to bolster this cadence. In fact, this aspect is so dominating that it feels almost inaccurate to call it turn-based. Sure, characters and enemies move through turns sequentially, with this order dictated by agility as you would expect, which quickly introduces one of the primary methods of optimizing for this system, making your characters faster. You issue commands that utilize ability points or AP, of which you can hold a maximum of 9, initially generating at the start of each turn from landing basic attacks and from parrying. You can perform range attacks at any point during your turn, free aiming your shots with a third-person shooter perspective, with each shot costing 1 AP but allowing you to target weak spots and enemies. Using abilities is accompanied by a quick-time mechanic, where being precise allows for higher damage, a generally tame and unobtrusive button press minigame that fortunately only uses one button and can be easily executed. Where things really depart, however, is in the dodging and parrying system. By timing your dodge at the right time, you can negate enemy damage and earn yourself some AP. But who is even dodging in this game? When there's a parry mechanic, you know I'm going to double down on that and embrace it wholeheartedly. It's not an overstatement to say that parrying and learning to parry is what this entire game's combat revolves around. Playing on expert difficulty, you barely survive more than 2 attacks from basic enemies, then parrying and counter-attacking serve as your bread and butter to get through encounters. The most glaring problem here is that parrying is simply annoying to execute. Hey now, I like to think that I'm half decent at video games, and if a game has parrying, I'm all up for the challenge. But Expedition 33's take on this mechanic quickly becomes a slog to get through, and I'll do my best here to elucidate why. Rather than what I'll describe as a rhythm-based parry system, one with clear and consistent visual and perhaps more importantly audio cues, the type of mechanic where you can close your eyes and envision purely from feel the cadence at which you time your parry and strike back. Sekiro is probably the most obvious example of this, euphoric in its feedback and execution, where there's an alignment and agreement with the game's contract and its enemies, training this specific muscle to respond to stimuli in a way that is engaging, fair, and most notably, rewarding. This dance-like elegance can only be distilled through strong audio and visual design, and a finely tuned window, both inviting and defined, that elevates this tete-a-tete style flourish. It's based on feel and undercurrent, undulating and flowing not through pure precision but an intrinsic unconscious understanding of pace. This type of parrying induces flow state, to relax and exhale, to clear the mind and lock in by letting go. Expedition 33 is the complete opposite of this. There is no audio cue that you can reasonably or reliably respond to, and attempting to hear that sharp swish of the attack as your first point of contact is almost impossible. Instead, the parry here is built entirely around pixel peeping, watching with absolute focus on the enemy's limbs and weapons, following their wind-ups carefully and timing your parry purely off the movements as it intersects with your character. You can't wing it, and enemies tend to launch successive attacks, all of which differ in timing to throw you off, not to mention they're equipped with multiple moves to bully you with. The parry window is so overtuned that it becomes tedious and unfun, even when nailing it, demanding a type of focus that causes you to grip your controller tight without much release or satisfaction. Missing even one parry in the chain has the double punishment of losing a bunch of health, and not being able to counterattack even if you've successfully negated most of the onslaught. On expert, missing parries is a death sentence, as parrying itself serves as your primary means of defense from beginning to end. With the massive roster of enemies in the game, each with a moveset you must learn and acclimatize to, forgetting the exact timing of each attack becomes the average experience. It is a constant exercise in frustration, and I found myself shaking my head again and again across my 60 hours, always in response to some bullshit telegraphs, freezing for just half a second longer, lashing out a frame earlier than you expect. There's simply no room to fuck up, and there are many enemies you face throughout the game that can only be beaten by parrying. I understand that this reliance on tripping you up is the only way to make combat encounters more challenging, besides increasing the enemy health and damage output. Mixing up attacks and telegraphs, diversifying them, and forcing you to adapt is all logical in theory, but in practice, the physical sensation of playing becomes so taxing that it's hard not to come away from a session feeling genuinely tired and jaded, with its unforgiving demand for engagement. This constant parrying is slightly alleviated by some other mechanics like a jump dodge, which is thankfully a lot more lenient and standardized in its visual feedback, with a glyph flashing briefly to indicate a jumpable attack. Later on, gradient parries are also introduced, which exist solely to counter specific deadly attacks, one that benefits from the ostentatious slowdown effect and a more generous window. These additions are inoffensive and push combat diversity, but the exasperation of the primary parry carries a long and inescapable shadow across the game. Perhaps the simplest solution here would be making the parry window slightly more forgiving, even by a couple frames. The precision required is so brutal and demanding that every encounter becomes intense in an unfun way, never letting you relax fully or enter flow state, relying entirely on reflexes instead. If the timing was tuned slightly, it would no doubt be more rewarding and fun, in that you can somewhat enjoy the thrill of battle. This dedication also completely nullifies the turn-based rhythm of the game, since you are always taking action, whether offensively or defensively. It begs the question of who this combat system is really designed for. Who is the target audience? Turn-based enjoyers, with their mind on slower paced strategy and build crafting, wouldn't want such punishing mitigation systems that demand such a high level of dexterity, failing which you're more than likely dead. Action combat fanatics, on the other hand, would find this defensive playstyle, forced to sit and carefully watch, eyes glued and tracing the arc of the enemy's movements right to the point of contact, unnecessarily grueling, when compared to moving around in 2 or 3 dimensions and actively creating space to maneuver and engage the enemy. Arduous would be my word of choice to summarize parrying in this game, and it is this focus on pure accuracy, both in precise visual feedback and mechanical execution, that ultimately chokes the essence of its combat, of fun and of game feel. An early litmus test and grave omen for this entire gameplay loop comes in the form of the Gestural Fight Club that you can stumble across relatively early in the game. This little arena consists of solo fights against increasingly challenging gladiators, with each victory earning you useful pictos for playing solo. This is the first of admittedly many moments where the combat made me want to throw my controller through my screen. The initial few fights are manageable, but the battle against Julian Tiny Hands is absolutely brutal. The ridiculous wind-ups, the feints, the fact that getting hit twice will most likely end you. This fight against the Gestural quickly feels unfair, and the parry system really fails to elevate the gameplay here. It becomes an exercise of pixel peeping and watching closely, a torture of timing and focus rather than rhythm and feel. Memorizing Julian's unpredictable moveset is less than half the battle, while being able to consistently react fast enough to his attack timings makes up the rest, and the margin for error is tiny, especially at this stage. Gripping the controller tight, locking in on Julian's movements, and finally besting him should feel rewarding, but the game's active prevention of letting you transition into flow state, with the mix-ups and precise timings demanding complete attention and dexterity, ultimately ejects the fun and leaves you frustrated. Of course, I could have come back here over-leveled, but I was keen to overcome this challenge right there and then to see if this combat would click with me in the process of honing my ability. It did not, and this random duel is unfortunately just the start, where the game's overcommitment to parrying against complex, punishing bosses begins to gomage any semblance of fun or fulfillment in front of your eyes, as you slog your way through fights that engage you and your senses in a hostage situation without providing relief. Back at the Stonewave Cliffs, Gustav and friends watch as SK grows in size and one-shots this massive Nevron by torpedoing straight into it, demonstrating his unfathomable strength. Why he can't just put you on his back right now and fly towards your destination is a mystery. The boss of this long level is the Lampmaster, which is easily the hardest battle in the game so far. The lead up to this encounter, with the Lancer igniting one by one as you approach, is a creepy and effective build up to your showdown with this unnerving creature, consisting of multiple arms spiraling out of its humanoid form, proudly presenting its titular lamps like trophies. The fight is immediately challenging, with the Nevron launching relentless attacks with much more ferocity than anything before. And just when you've whittled its first health bar down, it transitions into phase 2, beginning a trend that will define virtually every boss from this point onward. I managed to fight with Gustav all the way through to the end of the second phase, only to choke and die. Fortunately, second time's the charm. With the Lamp Master defeated, the crew retrieve SK's precious rock, empowering him to float on water as Lune and Ciel jump down from the cliff onto his bulging form. Just before Maelle and Gustav can follow, however, the same white-haired man from the beach appears, cane thudding menacingly as he approaches the two of them. The impending, overwhelming dread is undeniable, as this antagonist casually confronts Gustav, speaking in riddles and hinting at a much larger game at play. The music swells and we're met with the game's first and most brilliant emotional peak.
Run.
Please run.
Why are you doing this? We've done nothing to you. We should be on the same side. Let her go.
Something's going on up there.
SK, get us up there! Fuck, fuck, fuck! For those who come after. Right? You promised!
Gustav's death absolutely floored me, not emotionally per se, but more in its perfect execution and blindsiding nature. Nothing has foreshadowed or hinted at this outcome to this point, and the perceived safety of the protagonist has remained sacred and unquestioned so far. Gustav has been front and center in the story, solidly clad in plot armor from his introduction in Lumiere, with us as the player following his every move and viewing the world through his eyes. Even with a lifetime of enjoying stories in all forms, this is a plot twist I did not see coming. Gustav has been our sole proxy, the defined character for us to step into and experience this narrative, with his own clear motivations, developing character arc and narrative significance. And then he is killed right in front of our eyes, cutting all of that short. This bold move to execute the primary protagonist, one that we've been investing in both mechanically and emotionally, with no inkling of this untimely death, is perhaps Expedition 33's most masterful stroke, arguably its most memorable moment and the decision that sets it apart as a narrative. What would normally be an Act 2 climax when all hope is lost is instead repositioned as the Act 1 close, becoming a second inciting incident that catapults the rest of the game's story forward. I consider myself blessed to not have had this insane twist spoiled for me, and I literally sat back in my chair with my hands on my head, looking at the screen and going, what the fuck is actually happening right now? Even when the stranger shows up, just too late to save Gustav from the old man, you're still left reeling from the shock and the novel unpredictability of this story. It swerves so far in a different direction that all expectations are now thrown out the window, and the weight of its mystery increases tenfold. Why do all the characters look so similar, like splintered versions of the same person? Who's the white-haired girl and what answers lie in wait? Has anybody watched the German TV series Dark? Something about this mindfuck really reminds me of that show, as we're launched into what is becoming an engrossingly complex story, kicked into gear by Gustav's unexpected death. A strong start, to say the least, as the curtains close on Act 1. Escaping with their lives, the team reels from the sudden loss of Gustav and the arrival of the stranger, sexily voiced by the gruff Ben Starr no less. Joshua! Gustav's untimely death at the hands of the game's antagonist, stabbed through the chest, is itself very reminiscent of another scene between a well-loved character and a silver-haired villain from a not-too-distant story. Either way, it feels like we are now positioned at the very lowest point of our journey to slay the Paintress. Only the well-timed exposition of the stranger will save us from this doom and gloom. This mysterious fellow, who looks strikingly like Gustav, distractingly so even, introduces himself as Verso, and reveals that he was originally from Expedition 0, the first ever expedition, which makes him incredibly old. He reveals that his father Renoir was their commander, and that they were made immortal by the Paintress. Against Renoir's wishes, he now wants to end the Paintress so that his cursed existence can be set right. This explanation provides many more questions than answers, but with Gustav dead, Lune, Ciel, and Maelle vow to carry on the mission alongside the surprisingly amicable and resourceful Verso, no matter where this treacherous alliance may lead. The crew makes camp, and taking control of Verso, you can speak with the other characters to try and build rapport. This becomes the primary reason to camp in the overworld, beyond upgrading your party and weapons at the Curator, with your relationship with Lune, Ciel, and Maelle growing in level as you initiate certain heart-to-hearts with them. This growing intimacy is another JRPG staple, and works well here to flesh out the often tense and complex dynamics between the central cast. These conversations and corresponding level ups also unlock gradient attacks for each character. This game's limit breaks activated by consuming your gradient gauge. Each character has 3 ultimates to unlock, growing in power, with the last locked behind the highest level of friendship, which gives you a clear and rewarding goal to spend time speaking with them when given the chance. For now, the team resolves to forge on with this new stranger by their side, in hopes of getting closer to the Paintress. First, they must pass through the stone quarry that marks the middle of the game's map. Traveling out into the continent again, we are now able to swim around the overworld with SKA's help. The exploration opens up quite naturally and drastically, allowing for a slew of new optional activities, bosses, and dungeons to investigate. One such example are the gestural beaches and their minigames, which range from jump puzzles to climbing challenges to raft volleyball, moderately difficult challenges that reward you with various swimsuits for your characters. They're all pretty tame, so don't get too excited. Utilizing Verso in combat, he plays similarly to Gustav, with his perfection gauge ranking up by landing and parrying attacks, gradually ramping his damage output. Comparatively, he is a pretty straightforward and flexible character to play. Not too far into Act 2, we reach the next and final character that you can recruit, Monoko, a speaking gestural with old ties to Verso, whose kit is built around collecting and commanding Neveron attacks in battle by shifting into them. He's basically a blue mage with a diverse modular playstyle to round out the crew. Since Monoko can only gain Nevron abilities by winning in battle against him, he quickly becomes a mainstay in my party, acting as a reliable support character and multi-purpose caster for the rest of the team. It's also great that his character rocks, this odd, quick-witted friend full of eccentricities and a commanding tone. He is equally stoic and ridiculous, and his deep bond with Verso acts as a great emotional through line, as well as comic relief.
You see, there was a stalactite and I smashed it, utterly destroyed it. I did it in 2 attacks, plenty of damage. There was nothing left. Then there was a giant Pellerin that attacked. It was tough, but I defeated it, no problem.
Pellerins are weak. I could have done that blindfolded.
This expedition is gloomy.
Yeah. They lost a lot of friends, and they just buried another. Grieving takes time.
How about a little Verso magic to lighten the mood?
You mean the one that hurts like hell?
Yes, I mean the one that hurts like hell.
All right, I'll do it.
With Verso, Maelle, Lune, CL, Monoko, and SK banding together as the new Expedition 33, we are now fully underway with our central mission of searching for the Paintress's heart to break through the barrier. Before that though, let's take a more in-depth look at the game's RPG systems. Expedition 33's interesting take on combat is complemented by meaningful build craft consisting of Pictos and Luminas. This series of customization is the backbone of the entire game, and is what empowers you to build, experiment, and optimize your entire playstyle. It is one of the central pillars that solidify that traditional JRPG feel, an active and multi-layered interface that plays the biggest role in determining your success as you progress through the game. This is split into 2 distinct halves. The first are Pictos, equipable runes that grant you a specific ability or buff with stat bonuses attached to them, and can be discovered or earned at a range of levels. Each character can slot in 3 Pictos at a time, which forms the base level of buildcraft, adding raw stats to your character while also granting you unique boons based on the selected Pictos. These runes are comparable to something like materia, and can be leveled throughout the game by typically finding higher leveled versions or even different tiers, which have the same base ability but grant further increased stats. It is a simple system to understand and is the most perceivable and superficial part of your toolkit, the skin that sits at the top layer. Just below that, however, is the much more involved Lumina system. After winning 4 battles with a specific Picto equipped, that Picto is mastered, and the ability attached to it is unlocked as a Lumina that can be used by any member in your party. This only provides the corresponding ability but not the stat buffs attached, but fleshing out your builds with Luminas form the bulk of your RPG customization. Each character has a limited number of Lumina points, and each Lumina equipped uses up a set amount of those points, typically increasing based on how useful or overpowered that ability is, like an instant revive or attacking twice in a row. This balancing system encourages you to be smart and economical with your Lumina usage, with your Lumina points building passively with each level up. This allowance can also be actively increased by using colors of Lumina at the curator, which becomes a vital resource that you find throughout your journey. Smartly equipping Luminas to empower your character sounds simple on paper, but the biggest flaw here is how cumbersome and unintuitive this system first appears to you, so initially overwhelming that it prevented me from engaging with it deeply for a long time. The presentation of Pictos and then the need to click left stick to access your growing list of Luminas, of which you must navigate and assign per character, is incredibly tedious to execute. The visual noise of the main menu, combined with the complexity of this Picto-Lumina interaction, specifically with managing the number of Lumina points used when equipping and unequipping Pictos, created so much friction that I dreaded even opening up the character screen to manage my build. It really is an eyesore, and this resistance killed any desire to optimize my Lumina usage beyond the bare minimum. The objection that often flashed in my mind was I just want to play the game and not keep fiddling around in these menus. As such, I'll equip whatever useful Pictos I came across, usually attach them to my least essential character. Master said Picto to convert into Lumina after 4 battles, and rinse and repeat. Back at camp, I would evenly upgrade my characters with colors of Lumina, but the lack of intuitiveness would often overpower any incentive to carefully scan my build, unequip all my Pictos and Luminas, and rebuild my character from scratch. I definitely still undertook this process throughout my journey, especially when getting annihilated, but I can't say I particularly enjoyed it. I do think it's just a matter of presentation and the system's general obstructiveness and confusion. Not being able to view at a glance your activated Luminas really kills the user experience, and the cumbersome switching between screens while not being able to scroll the bottom right window is a nightmare. Another separate detailed tab in the menu for Luminas would have probably solved this, rather than cramming all this information into a single page. So while I respect the ability to customize and save Lumina loadouts, this edition, alongside sorting and favoriting Luminas, failed to salvage this poorly presented system, despite its underlying bones and logic being relatively sound. For now, in this first half of the game, just equipping the most obvious Pictos and useful Luminas proved sufficient, and I trucked along without too much difficulty, quickly equipping whatever new high-level weapon I happened to come across in the previous cave to increase my damage output. Speaking of weapons, if Pictos are the skin, Luminas the complex muscles, then your choice of weapon is the solid skeleton underneath that supports and dictates your entire build. Every character has access to a slew of unique weapons, a truly impressive arsenal of armaments that range in elemental affinity, attack power, and respective buffs. The weapon upgrade system is streamlined and effectively communicated, with each arm's playstyle expressed in the bonuses it unlocks at the level milestones of 5, 10, and 20. At a glance, you can understand a weapon's intrinsic value and how you're built towards it, which is fantastically simple in contrast to the overbearing Lumina system. An example is Lune's Coralim, which gives you 100% critical chance when Force Stains are active, encouraging you to max out this gauge before unleashing something like Elemental Genesis to devastating effect. Or Maelle's Medallum, which starts you in Virtuoso stance, empowering your first attack to obliterate things with 200% damage. These weapons also scale with 3 of your main stats, denoted by a sword icon and a letter grade. This seemingly innocuous addition, suggesting a desirable direction to build your character towards, is surprisingly the be-all and end-all of your stat distribution, and the most efficient way of increasing your strength is to only level up these stats, in order of most to least impactful. This simplicity is unexpected, and I remained unaware of this for a considerable amount of time, pumping points into stats like Might, mistakenly believing it would bulk up my attack power and agility so that I can simply attack more often. But this is not only suboptimal, but severely limits your overall damage output by not scaling with your weapon's 3 attributes. With each stat capping out at 99, you are better off following these guidelines, in a bizarre oversimplification of a stat system that doesn't really reward any deviation or creativity, even in the late game. In the face of the nightmare that is sorting and equipping Luminas, however, this is a welcome addition, and is further streamlined by the freedom to respec your characters at any time using recodes, another resource that you will discover quite frequently in your travels. This generous reallocation enables you to experiment with weapons throughout the early to mid game if you so choose, a much appreciated quality of life feature. Ultimately though, you'll probably find yourself most limited by your choice of weapon in the later half of the game, since the materials needed to upgrade them become consistently rare and precious, and weapons can't be recoded to retrieve your invested materials. This limitation makes sense in that weapons are your primary damage sources, and the game's progression is built around this ramping weapon level, starting at 1 and capping out at 33. In classic Dark Soulsian fashion, levels 1 to 3 require Chroma Catalyst, Polished Catalyst at 4 to 9, Resplendent Catalyst from 10 to 19, Grandiose Catalyst from 20 to 32, and Perfect Catalyst to hit level 33. With a respectable range of viable weapons and the scarcity of Chroma Catalysts, you tend to pick a path and funnel the necessary materials. There are only 11 perfect Chroma Catalysts in your initial playthrough, and that final jump between 32 and 33 grants the clearest and most substantial boost in attack power, so you have to be quite intentional with your choices. All that said, you spend the majority of the game getting up to level 20 for your weapon and unlocking its 3rd tier, progressing it in a relatively linear fashion. Expedition does a commendable job making this journey feel steady yet rewarding, despite the large number of levels to get through. The game's 3 acts correlate pretty directly to your weapon's 3 stages, levels 1 to 10 for Act 1, 11 to 20 for Act 2, and 21 to 33 for Act 3 in the post-game, a palpable and appropriate scaling and difficulty. This sort of intentional and smart game design is where Sandfall flexes their confidence in fleshing out these systems, balancing the experience around so many moving parts while still allowing for the adequate momentum to make progression feel mostly exciting. Except the random leveling of Pictos when defeating enemies, which is apparently because you've earned from that mob an upgraded version of one you already have. This has the effect of feeling almost random, like getting struck by lightning, and feeling strangely thankful for the blessing. With that settled, let's get back on the road. Traveling to the ruins of Old Lumiere, the party makes their way to Renoir's mansion, where the Paintress's heart resides, a deteriorating female figure that looks strikingly similar to the curator, who has been helping us at camp. Before Verso can strike at her, however, Renoir appears, leading to a very anticlimactic boss fight, before the old man teleports the entire mansion away and the Paintress's heart with it. At a loss, the team mull over their next plan of attack. They need to get past the defensive barrier that surrounds the Monolith. Eliminating the heart would have dispelled the shield, but this is no longer an option after losing their lead. After investigating the possibility, Lune devises a new plan to get the curator to forge a weapon using the incredibly dense chroma of great beings scattered across the world, known as Axons. This development kind of comes out of nowhere, and to this point the only hint we've gotten is that slain Titan slumped in the ruins of Old Lumiere, but it does all come together somewhat later in the story. For now though, 2 dungeons lay before us, each one the lair of these mythically powerful Axons. Our first stop is the island of Cyrene, and Sandfall's goated art direction is on full display here. The crumbling Colosseum, eroded by time, sits silently in its monastic glory. The sunlight washing the stone, sand wafting through, winds fluttering the ribbons that cascade across the open roof. This environment is something completely new within the game, an aesthetic we haven't been exposed to yet. The game revels in this presentation of constant novelty, always one-upping itself in the vistas it paints and the creative expression of its world. Every frame is indeed a painting here. Though this place is calming and surreal, with its religious overtones like a breath being held in quiet meditation, the dungeon itself is surprisingly dense as you travel its vast corridors and layers. The final boss against Cyrene is one of the game's highlights in terms of pure scale, as her dancing form rises from the pit and challenges you. I'm playing blind, so learning her weaknesses and getting through her multiple stages, especially the absurd ballet attack, was hard but gratifying. Lune's affinity for this elegant being also hints at something deeper, that their chroma resonates at a spiritual level. She who plays with wonder surrenders her power to the mage, who's defined not just by her curiosity, but by her tenacity to push forward always, to use her grief as fuel, to keep going no matter the cost to herself. Her strength lies in her determination, and the Axon yields to her unbreakable spirit. The second Axon sits on Visage Island. Visually and mechanically, this dungeon is a bit of a step down from Cyrene and is split into 3 smaller identical areas, helmed by their own creepy mask and associated boss. Within these veils, each associated with a certain emotion, the party observes as the Neverons act uncannily within these specific aspects: joy, sadness, and anger. But that's all irrelevant because the only thing I felt was pure, unadulterated rage when fighting against the fucking jovial Moissanoid. Against the fucking jovial Moissanois, who heals after every turn and drags this battle on forever. This one boss was so aggravating to get through that every frustration I've levied against the combat system crystallized here. Its sheer resistance to fun cementing this cold ambivalence deep in my bones. This might have been where the game broke me. Anyway, turns out Visage, the real Axon, was gonna summon the 3 masks against you, so good thing we destroyed them in each fail. Fuck you, jovial mask. Like Cyrene and Lune, Visage shares a connection to Ciel. From a superficial reading, this bond is clear enough. Ciel has gone through a whole life in a state of performance, switching between roles where appropriate or needed. It's obvious she hides a deep wound beneath her cheery exterior, and her ability to repel Visage here conveys her coming to terms with this reliance on masks, transforming in the process. These 2 Axons and the 2 women who master them are powerful metaphors for the way we move through the world, and their differing philosophies will no doubt be tested as the party moves towards their final goal. With the hearts of the Axons combined, the curator forges the barrier-breaking weapon for Maelle, creatively named Barrier Breaker, getting the expedition entry to the Monolith. The fabled Tower of Despair is a grueling dungeon, primarily due to the sheer length of the level. After the paintress retreats within it, the party follows and have to make their way through a litany of familiar locations, a collection of warped environmental vignettes from throughout their journey. The mind-bending metaphysical reality within the monolith, morphing into different shapes and reflecting the expedition's shared experiences, hints at the true, unbound construction of this world. The stages are a microcosm of the entire game, the condensed sequence your destiny in miniature. Before ascending to the peak of the monolith, we face Renoir, the loyal retainer who has been annihilating expedition after expedition, barring the path forward to the paintress, driven by an unrelenting desire to protect his family, whether that be his daughter Alicia, always by his side, or his wife Aline, her colossal white-haired form watching in vigil from a lonely sanctuary. This boss fight is cool with the dark beast bursting out of Renoir, but the real challenge waits just beyond. At the peak, the real paintress welcomes her son Verso, as her identity is confirmed to us as Aline Descendre, the reason behind the gommage, the source of their collective suffering, hiding away in her high castle and not sparing a thought towards the crushing grief this sunlit world has had to shoulder. After everything, we're finally here, face to face, and Expedition 33 will do what it takes to make it right. I then proceed to get obliterated by the paintress countless times. After smashing my head against the wall while barely surviving her first phase, only to die immediately in the second, I decided to leave the monolith for now and focus on getting stronger. This is a JRPG after all, and there must be some avenues to par that I've neglected. One big optional thing I've ignored till now is the gigantic Navron waiting in the water just off the coast here. This is Sprong, and he is your archetypal overworld superboss, one that beckons with its aura and is sure to put you to the test. At this point, Sprong is an absolute menace, but not unbeatable. This long, arduous boss fight is a war of attrition, with your party whittling away at the Navron's massive health pool as he moves through his distinct attack phases. The best and worst thing about Sprong is how much focus this boss demands from you. Just like everything else in this game, you have to first learn his moveset, memorize the rhythm of his unyielding offensive, and you must parry, a fact which shouldn't be a surprise at this point. I played this fight relatively safe, using Verso and Lune as my main damage dealers and Monoko as support. Every time I had 2 gradient bars full, I would use Monoko's level 2 gradient attack, Sanctuary, which would grant each character 2 shields, buying me more space in case I made a mistake or mistimed a parry. That was the strategy of choice, utilizing Monoko's shield to ensure I didn't wipe after 30 minutes of battle from an inevitable slip-up. This becomes especially tense as the battle progresses and Sprong starts adding more and more hits to his attacks. The good thing here is that the escalation of difficulty is organic and provides the right amount of pressure, where the moves can still be adapted to. This is the benefit of an extended fight against a single enemy, where you're able to learn its moveset through repetition and sheer exposure, perhaps the only time where flow state is achievable in this game. And when I say the battle was long, I do mean it. This massive slugfest against Sprong took me 45 minutes of fully focused gameplay, inching my way towards victory. Minimizing risk with Monoko's shield, stacking on damage with Lune's Elemental Genesis and Verso's Steeled Strike. Sprong finally falls and grants me the single Picto that most drastically changes the game, Cheetah, which allows you to take 2 turns in a row. This Picto, while not absolutely trivializing everything, is a massive power spike and switches up the rhythm of combat in your favor. Cheetah grants you skill expression through flexibility, allowing you to fluidly chain together moves with a strategic edge rather than just spamming your strongest attack, which feels like the first major step towards true build optimization. At this point, however, equipping Cheetah as a Lumina is absurdly expensive, so it serves primarily as an incredible buff for one character, in my case Maelle. With Sprong defeated, we head back to the Paintress, a return trip which takes a surprising amount of time to trek through, from the main entrance and then fast traveling up to the Twisted World, and then actually re-entering the peak of the Monolith and climbing up. All this power, and the Paintress is still a pain in the ass. The extended telegraphs, that short delay that throws you off, the ridiculously tight timings of the void meteors careening down at you like bullets. This fight is genuinely frustrating to get through, even with the increased output from Cheetah. Fortunately, breaking the Paintress's first phase is the main challenge, as the team takes to the skies to do battle against her in a colossal form. The spectacle of the Paintress ripping up reality and going all out delivers a good level of hype, and the mechanic of dispelling your counts of doom by rotating who free aims the orbs is a fun Destiny raid vibe. Despite the scale, Phase 2 is somewhat easier, and it isn't long before we reduce this cruel angel to her final stage. As she lies in the field, the Paintress doesn't attack anymore, instead healing you and allowing you to finish her off. This final phase is a somber narrative beat as she invites her own destruction, giving up her control of this world, wrestled away by this ragtag group of vengeful adventurers. Verso cradles her body in his arms, pitying this shattered image of his mother, perhaps even regretting this choice. He doesn't want to let his mother go, but this is the only way they will secure their freedom. Together with him, Maelle gamages the Paintress and releases her strangled grip on this choking, desperate world. Finally, Expedition 33 plants their flag at the peak of the Monolith, their long, grueling commitment to vengeance and liberation bearing fruit. Despite how grand the scene appears as they stand there looking on at an existence without the Paintress, the victory seems hollow and their outcome rather anticlimactic. I'm reminded of Miyamoto Musashi's famous words from Vagabond. I thought I'll be happier. As the team hop back on Esquire and set course for Lumiere, there is a looming sense of dread reeling from their momentous reality-warping actions, as if they've committed a grave tactical error and disrupted some sort of divine balance. The return to Lumiere is moving in the way the characters are shown to all have lost something in this long journey, not the same people they were when they left. Monoko and Esquire being gawked at by the citizens, Maelle having to wordlessly break the news of Gustav's death, Lune and Ciel having no reunion of their own. This homecoming should be glorious, but is instead morose. As Verso reads Alicia's letter on the pier, anticipating the sun's eventual setting, his nihilism is on full display. His silence catches up to him. Up ahead, the monolith erupts with light and crumbles in the distance, the shockwave racing across the sea toward Lumiere. The wall of energy slams into the city, saturating it throughout. In an unexpected yet hard-hitting twist, everybody begins to gamache, dissipating into the ether, indiscriminately erased. No one is spared, and this time, nobody is left behind to grieve. Maelle looks on in horror as everything she has ever known and loved and fought for is expunged right before her very eyes, and then she fades away herself. The world sits quiet and empty, its last breath evaporating into a colorless sky. After the absolute insanity that has been this game's story, with painted worlds and painted people and other esoteric hard-to-grasp elements, we are finally blessed with some good old exposition. Maelle wakes up in the Desandra manor, one eye missing, her skin scarred, unable to speak. This is the real Maelle, also known as Alicia Desandra, having survived the attack on her family's manor but at great cost to her mind and body. Out here, in the real world, her brother Verso is dead, killed by that raging fire after sacrificing himself to save Alicia. This tragic incident is the catalyst for the entire story of Expedition 33. Alicia and the Desandras are part of a group called the Painters, individuals with the ability to imbue their souls into the art with the use of chroma, and literally conjure up entire realities. Aline herself, the matriarch of the family, was once the head of the Painters Guild, unrivaled in her talent to paint new worlds. But the Painters' rivals, the seemingly vicious and unelaborated on Writers Guild, most likely possessing a similar power and influence, somehow tricked Alicia into causing the fire that consumed the Desandra family home, scarring her and killing her older brother Verso in an act of war. Racked by grief and pain, Aline retreats into the canvas that Verso had painted when he was a child, a world of gestures and fantasies and fun, containing a very real fragment of his soul, attached to the chroma of the painting. Refusing to part from her beloved son, and seemingly unable to bring herself to face Alicia, the tragic collateral or perhaps cause of this fracturing incident, Aline paints herself a replacement family within the frame, a painted husband, a painted son, and 2 painted daughters, intending to spend her days in this perfect fantasy. Remaining inside the painting, however, is a death sentence, and the Desandras know this. The real Renoir refuses to allow the love of his life to wallow and rot within their son's canvas, and so takes it upon himself to pursue her and force her out of her grieving state. These opposing wills and their extended forays into the painted world form the foundation of the unreality that Maelle and the others view as their whole existence. The real Clair, in an abrasive, unrelenting tone, most likely exasperated by her parents' unwillingness to perceive the true threat in their very real world, that of the Writers Guild, commands Alicia to retrieve their mom and dad from what she views as make-believe in the canvas, so that they can unite as a family and wage their shared war of vengeance out here. There's an obvious animosity between the siblings, with Clair's bitterness towards her disfigured sister apparent through her condescending and unnecessarily cruel tone. Clair is tired of her parents' endless bickering, one running away, the other fixated on saving her. She's tired of Alicia's passivity and fragility, perhaps not blaming her for the incident that took Verso, but still viewing her as a burden weighing down her wrathful schemes. Clair sees herself as the only one with her head on right, consumed by rage and willing to do what needs to be done for her family. This dynamic is terrible and fascinating, and the meek Alicia is stuck in the middle of all of this. Her sister goads her, telling her to paint her voice back within the canvas and chastises her not to become like their mom and give in to the fantasy. Following her sister's instruction, Alicia enters Verso's canvas, but immediately her inexperience as a painter and clouded judgment cause her to be swallowed up by Aline's uncompromising chroma, her mind and form painted over and fashioned into something familiar and new. And so Maelle is born, a normal child raised in Lumiere under the shadow of the Monolith, cursed to experience the sufferings of a people created by her mother, a perpetual cycle of grief and sorrow. This reveal that the real Alicia was reincarnated as Maelle in the painting recenters her significance as a character. She becomes the primary protagonist of this final act, the false epilogue being written over with her painted name. Returning to the desolate Lumiere with her full memories, Maelle acknowledges her identity as the real Alicia, but honors the life she lived as a child of the painting. She embraces her paintress's roots and is given access to new skills, the 2 most significant ones being Standor and Burning Canvas, single-target nukes that quickly position Maelle as your endgame carry. Meeting with Verso, the painted version of her dead brother made immortal by Aline, who has known this whole time what he truly is. Maelle convinces him that they can reason with the real Renoir and keep this painted reality of theirs, and everything in it, alive. Her attachment to this life, her 16 years in the canvas, living as an orphan in the streets of Lumiere, being taken in by Gustave, experiencing love and grief alongside the multitude of lives that exist here. To Maelle, this is as real as anything on the outside world. In fact, in many ways, it is even realer. This is the life that was stripped from her after the fire, the damage to her body, the destruction of her family. In Verso's canvas, she has found pain and suffering, but also richness and bonds and camaraderie. It isn't a sweet, blissful fantasy, but a harsh road traveled and a character shaped by struggle, loss, and overcoming. This is where she belongs. The Gommage, then, is actually Renoir's doing, an attempt to erase Aline's creations beginning with the oldest and working down, literally scrubbing out the canvas. The paintress in turn was trying to warn Lumiere of those she could save from her husband's destructive will, the number painted on the front of the monolith. She was never the cause, simply doing what she can to stop her haven from deteriorating, in an infinite struggle against Renoir's ruthless methods. Now her curled up form, head down, face resting in her knees, in a posture of shame and sorrow. It all makes sense. This also explains the curator's shrouded motivations, existing as a weak manifestation of the real Renoir, a shade propelling the team along their journey. What we understood as an act of justice, protecting Maelle after the beach, growing the party's strength, fashioning them a weapon to break the monolith's barrier. All of this was simply an effort to weaponize our protagonists and break the stalemate, all of which Verso was an accomplice. With Aline rooted out and removed from the painting by our hands, Renoir is finally freed from his subjugation at the bottom of the monolith, and enacts his plan to truly wipe the canvas clean. He tells Maelle as much when she pleads with him to leave the painting, that Aline's forced expulsion means he too can exit and join his family outside. But Renoir, as always has been his mission, won't stop until this path for escape is destroyed, wanting to burn this last remnant of his son in an act of severance, but also disavowing the grief of his wife, refusing it to her. And so our primary objective of Act 3 is made clear: regroup and stop Renoir from erasing this reality and sentencing everything to oblivion. In a game full of twists and reversals, Expedition 33 really thrives on these unexpected revelations and does an excellent job of letting you assemble the pieces yourself. By weaving together the clashing motives and understanding the separation of painter and painted, you are encouraged to pry into the narrative's undercurrent and make sense of it on your own, without massive expositional cutscenes that lore drop everything for your convenience. You still have to use your brain, and this intrinsic strength, presenting a complex story of lots of moving parts, encouraging your engagement and agency in unraveling its meaning, is undoubtedly awesome, and works well as a cinematic experience. Expedition 33 is truly impressive in its balancing of both nuance and spectacle. However, the game's departure from the initial fantastical story about facing an apocalyptic event, driven by complex characters railing against their collective fate to restore what they believe is true peace, suddenly transforms into this intimate family drama. They both explode in scale, in that the world we've spent all this time in is not real, and there's a bigger threat out there, while also shrinking down the premise's initial epicness to a strangely small and simple affair. This all takes a bit of thinking through, I'll admit, and it's hard to say exactly where I fall between loving and hating it. Act 1 is incredibly strong and memorable due to its focus on this dying world, the desperation of the expedition, the impenetrable mystery that lashes out of the darkness, hinting at something frighteningly immense at play. The confusion, the unpredictability, the climactic depth of what you assume is the game's protagonist. All of this generates this maelstrom of awe and momentum as to what the rest of this game might achieve. In many ways, it reminds me of the earlier seasons of Attack on Titan, pulling you into its world of loss and hopelessness and carnage, while a bigger mystery brews and quietly drives the story forward. Can't forget the shock of unexpected deaths as well, highlighting the apathy of its world. Act 2 then becomes an archetypal odyssey, as the team, with Verso's guidance and suspicious knowledge of the deeper threads at play, are propelled to all corners of the world in an attempt to fulfill their initial mission. Here, the story's focus is still squarely on Verso, Maelle, Lune, Ciel, and Monoko, their relationships, their motivations, made even more apparent in their hunting of the Axons, where each character is given their own moment. The constant opposition of painted Renoir, fighting for the side of Aline and the preservation of the canvas, remains totally confusing, and the narrative refuses to make any of it easily passed. The visually striking and narratively significant black and white cutscenes, the obvious connection between Verso, Renoir, and Alicia that suffers little elaboration, the tenuous parallels between Ciel and Visage, and Lune and Cyrene. This seafaring journey is also where the main chunk of Expedition 33's gameplay takes place, with the narrative's growing denseness overlaid by overworld exploration and long and sometimes tedious dungeons. By the time you enter the Monolith, it feels like both a lot and very little has actually taken place. You stand ready to fight the Paintress after eliminating her guard dog Renoir, but every other mystery and motivation remains just that, a mystery. Because of this obvious blind spot that the real review has yet to happen, your fight against the Paintress in what should feel like the ultimate battle the entire game has been building towards is emotionally undercut by the mounting, unfulfilled anticipation that has been steadily boiling throughout your playthrough. Beating the Paintress, planting the flag and returning home, only for everybody to gomage, ends up being painfully expected, since you're already primed for an inevitable Act 3. And when I woke up in that bed in the original Dessandra mansion, taking control of Elysia and promised answers to the questions that have been burning within me since Act 1, well, it's fine. I just didn't expect it would be Chinese. It's fine. I just didn't expect it would be all a dream. Okay, maybe that's not completely accurate, but it's hard to shake that feeling. When you stand before that massive canvas in that grand room, real Aline and Renoir mindlessly fixated on it, their aged faces swirling with chroma, the real Clair speaking on the very real threat of the Riders Guild, responsible for the fire that killed the real Verso. You can't help but feel that everything we've just gone through, everything we've endured, is no longer very real at all. The sudden reveal that out here, in a completely separate reality, the Dessandras are a prominent and esteemed family of painters, actually at war with an enemy without, and that the painter world is simply the setting of what first appears as an escalating family squabble between husband and wife. It feels quite deflating to recognize this truth. There have been very real stakes out here that have been hidden from us this whole time, sucking the air out of all the build-up and mystery at the exact same time it satisfies it. This inflection point, one of clear distinction between truths in the world, reminds me again of Attack on Titan. Except in that story, the massive twist takes its mystery and detonates with unimaginable and unprecedented scale, turning everything on its head. What started as embers being fanned erupts into a raging bonfire, thrusting that narrative about walls and titans and basements into what feels like a completely novel final act with thunderous force. Here it's much quieter. All the revelations we discussed earlier that stem from this unexpected and impossible to predict twist introduce complexity in regards as to who's who, what's what, and why. But it also diminishes that vibrant world full of life into a sandbox with toys and rules and governance. Of course, this is the ultimate point of the story, but it's hard to shake that feeling of disappointment, almost robbing the characters of their agency and their shared existence of any genuine stakes. Not that their world or their struggles aren't real, but in that at any point everything can be reset or returned to what it was, at the stroke of a brush and the whims of fallible humans. Well, let's table this discussion for now and see if the game's true ending, after ejecting and turning in all its enigma as currency, can make sense of this liminal feeling, caught somewhere between impressiveness and subtle disappointment. Escaping from Renoir as he exerts his dominance over Lumiere, Maelle and Verso make camp, ruminating on what must be done to stop their father. Maelle attempts to draw upon the chroma and paint Lune and Ciel back into existence, but she struggles to properly channel her powers and grows frustrated. This is where my favorite line of Expedition 33 is spoken, a piece of understated dialogue that naturally cemented itself as the thesis that motivated my writing for this script. Verso guides Maelle's hand and states quite saliently, painting isn't about verisimilitude, it's about essence. With this maxim in mind, Maelle paints the familiar forms of her friends, recreating them from the chromatic ether. This reunion is mostly depressing, as the team must now grapple with Verso's betrayal, the reality of their world, their existence hinging on the whims of deities who birth and reap them with little regard to their sustained happiness. They are small and meaningless, their individual lives and the tragic circumstance of their world simply a battleground for this cosmic struggle of grief. Despite these circumstances, however, they continue. For what else do they know except this life? What else do they fight for if not the memories of their companions and those that they love? What else is there except tomorrow, even if that tomorrow is a fiction recklessly imagined in the fractured mind of a god? This third act reflects the freedom that comes with knowing this truth, by unexpectedly dropping its trademark linearity in favor of a true open world. With SKA, you can now fly anywhere across the continent, shifting the general feel of the game by allowing you to choose your own adventure. The restraints come off, while the looming threat of Renoir sits in Lumiere, beckoning you to him. So let's do this one last time. The first thing you'll notice when stepping out into the overworld and fighting the first batch of Neverons you see is that you get flat out annihilated by them. The enemy level has increased dramatically, and this power spike is the catalyst that encourages you to undertake a slew of optional, and in this case essential, side quests that will bring you to an appropriate strength. Or at least that's the idea. Dumped rather unceremoniously into this third act world state, I had no clue as to what the intended path was, besides some vague instruction from your companions at camp that prompt you in different directions. I knew Renoir couldn't be the immediate next stop, if the strength of these random mobs was anything to go by. And so after fumbling around for a bit, I did a quick Reddit search to get a rough roadmap. The primary way to get stronger from here on, besides leveling up, is upgrading your weapons with grandiose chroma catalysts. First stop is the Endless Tower, the colossal spire surging into the sky, its imposing silhouette dominating the overworld. This is the game's Colosseum, a series of combat gauntlets that ramp in difficulty and reward you with valuable loot. There are 11 floors altogether, with each floor having 3 encounters, for a grand total of 33 trials. Surprisingly, you don't actually scale the tower physically and ascend floor by floor, which is what you expect from its name. Rather, you interact with this canvas and select from a scroll menu. Very functional in execution, but definitely strips back the grandness on display when you first enter the place. Doing the first couple floors grants you some levels and grandiose catalysts, but it wasn't long before I hit a wall upon reaching floor 3. We'll come back to this later. For now, we undertake Maelle's character quest, which brings us to the Reacher. This is an incredibly long but straightforward dungeon set in the shadow of the obscured third Axon, as you scale its rickety structure. I enjoy the character development that is centered here, the Reacher being Renoir's test hoisted upon his own daughter. Maelle is deathly scared of heights, resenting her father for his callous philosophy and stern approach to growth. Aligning with his father's ideals, Verso sees in it more than a lesson, but a motivating call to action. He just wants you to fly. And fly we will, sorta. Mostly just sitting on these magical elevator platforms that ferry you around. At the top, just before the summit, you can veer off and face the chromatic brustler, with some absolute bullshit hammer combos, but the mechanic of bursting the orbs to hurt him when he switches stance is engaging. Also, the battle music cuts off completely here, swallowing the fight in an eerie, unintentional quiet. Up ahead, looking over the Reacher, is the painted Alicia, waiting and working on a portrait of the Axon. She wordlessly invites Maelle into its maw and challenges her to a one-on-one duel. This fight is memorable in that it's a proper mirror match, where Alicia unleashes familiar attacks with that same blitzing speed you've grown accustomed to with Maelle. This boss is fun and frenetic, and although Alicia's attacks are a nightmare to parry, the atmosphere is top-notch and the resolution even more so. Back outside, Maelle gamages Alicia right in front of Verso's eyes, fulfilling her painted self's wish to be free while devastating her brother, taking from him the last remnant of his family within the canvas. It's tragic that their mother Aline painted her own daughter, not as a perfect recreation, but as the broken version of Alicia that survived the fire but is traumatized by loss. This seems unnecessarily cruel, cursing painted Alicia to wander the canvas carrying the guilt of her past, physically and mentally scarred and unable to speak. Why Aline would do this isn't made clear, whether it's her own resentment towards her daughter, or that she preferred to recreate her family as is. That said, she did bring her dead son back, which lends credence to Alicia's painted form being a punishment, shifting blame onto her daughter despite being able to live in a world of her own design. Go claim your piece of sky, Maelle tells Alicia, liberating her from this painful, lonely existence. Verso lashes out, struggling with his conflicted feelings toward protecting his little sister, his spiteful tone towards Maelle understandable in that she gives him no choice in the matter, though it's not his choice to make but Alicia's. In many ways, this is Verso getting a taste of his own medicine, and this dynamic is something we see mirrored in the game's final moments. Back at camp, Maelle and Verso attempt to reconcile, but when asked whether he would have saved Gustave, Verso admits that he could have, and that he let him die, so that Maelle can follow through with the mission. He reveals that the real Clair had met him 3 separate times and instructed him to look after her sister in the canvas, knowing her to be the real Alicia. Despite her pain, she forgives Verso and lets go of her anger. This moment of vulnerability raises their relationship to the highest level, literally, and Maelle unlocks her third and most potent gradient ability, fittingly named Gommage. After this pivotal character quest, we go to Frozen Heart to finish up that dungeon, and then to the Dark Shore back near the start of the game, where the original expedition was massacred by Painted Renoir. It's time for payback as I spent a decent amount of time here farming these evil hand Nevrons, earning us a large chunk of EXP and a decent amount of grandiose catalyst per run. I solidified my main combat strategy here, keeping Monoko primarily to cast buffs and grant AP and shields, while using a duo of Verso's burn damage and basic attacks, and Lune's elemental genesis. With Maelle and Ciel, I mainly used Standall to delete enemies and Ciel to do some chip damage. Once again, not at all optimized, but fun enough to be engaging and definitely still leaving room for challenge. The other character quests aren't particularly riveting, though they are meaningful distractions, with each unlocking their respective final gradient ability. SKA's character quest brings you in direct conflict with Francois once again, gifting him a fitting toy of a rock with a face. Monoko's character quest clashes you with Golgra as you try to revive Noko, revealing that Noko was Monoko's guardian and mentor and that he only wants to return the favor. Though Noko is brought back, he is a version of himself without the memories of the expedition, which is a sad outcome. The best part of this quest is this little exchange though. Now come over here and let's snuggle. Lune's quest brings you to an encounter near Cyrene where you come across the remains of a parent's expedition. Finding a mother's last words recorded in the journal, hoping that their daughter will finish the job they couldn't, Lune grapples with the fact that the pressure never stopped, and that she was simply raised as their backup plan to secure a lasting legacy. It's an interesting note, this suppression and expectation, with Lune embracing her musical talents as an escape. Despite it being frivolous both in her and her parents' minds, it is the one thing that gives her her identity. Opening up to Verso, she hints at her repressed feelings for him, regretful that he didn't get to explore it, but grateful that he has CL instead. Speaking of, it was only after talking to a friend about Expedition 33 that I realized there were even romance options in the game. It never even occurred to me that it would branch out in this way, an organic system that is quite impressive in how invisible and nuanced it is. Though I guess me choosing CL almost subconsciously without knowing any of this says something about me and my general type, I guess. Speaking of, CL and Verso spend one final night together, after which she calls it off, knowing that her husband Pierre will soon be back in the picture. CL divulges the traumatic events that followed Pierre's death, that she swam out into the ocean hoping to die, not realizing that she was with child. After almost drowning, SKA brought her to safety, granting her a new lease on life, though the unborn child was lost. This incident is tragic and heavy and explains CL's blasé attitude, a way of coping with the painful baggage she carries with her. In a world so limited on time and choice, the love of her life was taken from her prematurely, and her own internal darkness brought her to the brink, and lost a chance at a future together with their child, however short. And now Pierre might be revived, and she has to explain it to him. This character writing is Sandfall relishing complexity while still hitting hard with emotion, and its restraint and considered depth is something I can truly respect. I'm glad that Verso and CL had each other, if only for a moment, to help both of them move through this crushing grief, loving each other at their lowest and the ultimate platonic expression of care. With all these character quests wrapped up, Lumiere and Renoir await. The assault on the city is a cool spectacle, though it's a bit dire that all we get are a bunch of ghostly soldiers charging forward while Renoir has a literal demon army under his command. I'll give them credit though, the expedition is crashing down to do battle and hold the line is epic, and gives this final offensive an air of gravitas. Traversing through the ruins of Lumiere, we step into the narrative full circle, forging through its streets and crumbling architecture, back from the pier towards where the entire game started. Along the way is the Journal of Expedition 60, which contains the most absurd and badass entry yet. It details how the 60 had penetrated the Monolith's barrier completely naked, breaking past the unknown and discovering that the paintress wasn't the problem, but Renoir, sealed underneath the Monolith. This group of absolute chads achieved this on their own strength, but were lost to the waves as they tried to return to Lumiere to communicate their findings, never able to warn the city of the truth. This small detail adds so much texture to the world of Clair Obscur, and contributes to that mythic feel, that so much can and has been lost to history and time. Either way, rest in peace Expedition 60. Their nakedness probably means we won't get a Clair Obscur spin-off, but your impact here, both narratively and in a meta way, is truly felt. With my party's current level and upgraded weapons, this area is mostly a cakewalk, which doesn't bode well for Renoir who waits at the end. Due to the opening up of the world in Act 3, getting overpowered in this way feels like a given. Though the build-up is cool, the central mystery of the narrative has long been solved, and we are here with the simple goal of stopping Renoir from erasing everything from existence. Engaging the painter in battle, we are definitely a bit too strong at this point, easily blitzing through his first phase without much trouble. This reduces the grandeur of the fight dramatically, especially compared to the struggle against the paintress, but it still works as a final boss. This cutscene that plays is also great.
Papa?
Alicia.
Please, I just want you to understand what this canvas means to me.
I do understand. I know how powerful and intoxicating it is. How deeply attached we can become to the worlds we pour our hearts and souls into. I was enthralled, and it nearly killed me.
Doesn't mean you have to erase Verso's canvas.
Child, do you think I want to? After all the sorrows we've endured, do you really think that I want to destroy this last piece of his soul?
Don't.
Life keeps forcing cruel choices. We do what we must.
Grief often blinds us, and we make choices we can never take back.
You grieve for two.
I grieve for many.
The choices of parents leave indelible marks upon their children. But ultimately, the voices in their head have to be their own. You cannot set the boundaries of their life for them.
After the fire, you wanted me to find new joy in life. And I tried. But I couldn't. Verso died because of me. How do I get from that to joy?
Child, it will get better, I promise you. But this is not the way. Your friends speak truth. And it changes nothing. You can hate me. But that's a choice I must make. As your father, I must look out for you. Especially when you can't look out for yourself.
You treat me as if I'm still 5!
I treat you as if the shadow from the worst day of our lives is going to suffocate you and take you from us too! Enough. I said enough.
Renoir is basically right, that this desperate clutching onto a fantasy is not a life. The way he summons the 3 Axons behind him, filling you with dread as you realize how many phases we're going to have to get through. But just when all is lost, Aline tears her way back into the painting, and using her colossal form, handles the Axons while you wage your final gambit against Renoir. Against the combined might of Expedition 33, the Patriarch is put down, and banished from the painting. Maelle promises her father that she will eventually exit and return to her life as Alicia, but Verso sees through this lie, knowing that, like Aline, she intends to live and die in this world, unable to resist the reality surrounded by friends and where her body and voice work. The victory earned, Verso follows the shade of his mother into the portal, depositing him into the heart of the canvas, where he finds that same hollow boy crouched and painting mechanically on the ground. He approaches the shade, recognizing him as the real Verso, the fragment of his soul eternally trapped in here and forced to paint. Verso grapples with the undeniable truth. He is carrying the weight of everybody's grief, becoming the battleground for those he loves. His mother, his father, his sister, all wishing him to be something he's not and can never be. Their beloved Verso de Cendre. This last sliver of that man, nothing more than a boy working tirelessly to sustain the illusion, should be allowed to rest. Maelle follows after Verso, and recognizing his intention to destroy the canvas, the two are forced into a standoff. Verso tells her that this is not worth her life. Maelle pleads with him that in here she has a chance to live. Out there she merely exists. You in turn must decide. Play as Maelle and preserve the painting, or become Verso and put an end to this folly. This is Expedition 33's most significant moment, the choice the entire game has been building up towards. After everything you've seen, after everything you've been through, you, the player, must choose the fate of the canvas. Fending Maelle off as Verso is hardly a challenge. Despite her immense strength, Verso's time in the canvas, his origin within it, growing to something beyond his intended design, his unnaturally long life of torment and suffering, that all fuels him, fuels you, to fight tooth and nail for what you believe is right. The struggle here results in the erasure of the canvas, as Maelle gamages in Verso's arms and is forcefully ejected into the real world. Monoko and SK come through the portal to find Verso, and without judgment or resentment or pity, these dear friends embrace one final time, relieved that the real Verso, the child endlessly painting, can finally be put to rest. It's beautiful how these oldest companions want to see their friend free, and are willing to back him all the way, knowing that this familial strife was always meant to be a process of acceptance, and that life must go on. It's a moving goodbye, one that reduces Verso back to a child and captures that intimacy and magic of childhood, as a boy says goodbye to his imaginary friends. Ciel comes in next, and hers is the most heartbreaking. The two exchange looks, lovingly, longingly, both knowing that neither will get the happy ending they had wished for each other. Ciel is forlorn but understanding, perhaps since her life within this painting has been one of pain and emptiness, not unlike Verso's, clinging onto the vague, delusional hope of being reunited with a husband and child, a future which Verso has now taken from her. Her eyes are questioning but hold no resentment, realizing that this decision is perhaps the right one, and that consigning everything to oblivion is the only way for either of them to be truly free. She reaches for Verso's hand as he reaches out for hers, bridging that gap rather than turning it down. Two lost souls arriving at the same destination, searching the depths of each other's hearts. Yet we will never know for sure what Ciel truly feels. With this offering of peace, she vanishes. Lune steps in last and, realizing Verso has once again ripped away their agency, their dignity, their desire to live, selfishly choosing a destiny for them without consideration. She glares at him and sits down in protest. This wholly physical act, an expression of death stare, her wrath seething through her eyes, Lune refuses to look away from Verso as she gamages, wanting nothing more than to remind him of his wickedness, robbing them all of their futures. This exit is fitting for Lune, for everything that she has done, for everything she has forgiven, for everything she has sacrificed for a tomorrow that will now never come, due to one man's decision to sacrifice the many for the one, outwardly for Alicia and inwardly for his true self. Her rage and frustration are something that can't be put into words, distilled only in this silent action, to sit and be angry, condemning Verso for his choice. With all his friends gone and the canvas unpainting itself, Verso extends a hand to the real Verso. He is given a moment to reflect, to wrestle with whether he's the hero or the villain, or as to weigh his drastic, selfish actions, justified for the greater good and a deeper desire to overcome grief. We must inspect our own moral judgment on his character. Verso, for all his capacity for love and laughter and kindness, is haunted by his knowledge of self and this specious world, born within it but ironically existing outside its rules. His cutthroat, uncompromising pursuit of what he believes to be the best option is something he views as a strength, but his rejection of others, no matter how close, is the same streak that has kept him alone his entire existence. With his decision here, as has been reflected throughout the game, he carries on his father's mission, the real Renoir and him blending together. Just like the end of Act 2, manipulating the others into defeating the paintress and ousting Aline from the painting, it has always been inside of him to put an end to this charade, one way or another. And seeing the fragment of Verso painting endlessly, he steels his resolve and chooses to free everybody of this fiction, no matter the personal or interpersonal cost. Back in the real world, we're greeted with the Dessandres united, standing together in front of Verso's grave. It's a solemn sight, but this was the outcome the real Renoir and the painted Verso strove towards, for their family to grieve with each other, side by side, instead of hiding away, and to take each painful step necessary to heal from the death of a beloved son and brother. Renoir, Aline, Clair, and Alicia have nothing to retreat to now, nothing to war over anymore, nothing but each other and their bonds. They are ultimately reunited by Verso himself, and must lose him truly in the process. As the family disperses, forging on into their new lives, Alicia sees the rest of the expedition, their painted selves waving goodbye as this chapter, her life as Maelle, comes to a tender but necessary close. She is given a life to love, an uncertain but tangible path towards acceptance, and a chance at true happiness beyond the grief. And that's all we get. We'll never know how the Dessandres heal, but at the very least we know that they are together, broken out of the fantasy by the spectre of their own son, no less. When the credits rolled here, I wondered to myself, is this the good ending? It leaves enough grey in its construction that it's difficult to wholeheartedly agree with Verso, yet I can't think of any better resolution. There's an intimacy here and it all unfolds rather quickly, offering closure but feeling somewhat underwhelming in its silence. But what more could there be? What if this decision to destroy the canvas wasn't the right one? Swiping away Verso as Maelle is hardly a challenge, her significance as a paintress, the chosen one entering this fractured world, growing attached and fighting for its continued existence. You easily repel Verso's desire for annihilation as he collapses and begs Maelle to unpaint him. Please, I don't want this life, Verso mutters. I don't want this life, he says again and again, trailing off weakly as his soul is subjugated to this cruel fate. Maelle comforts him, unaware that this path will only lead to the chains that shackle him, reducing his painted form to just another one of her peons in a world where she exists as the only real thing. And so the canvas lives on, with Maelle's desire to seek refuge from the grief of the outside world cementing itself at its core. Like Aline, Maelle grieves her brother and the destruction of her family, but more than that, she grieves everything that she has lost. Her scarred, voiceless body a constant reminder that she can never return to what her life once was. In the canvas though, she can be anything she wants, and life can tick on eternally. We see the characters gather at the opera house, Monoko and Eske manning the doors, Lune sitting with Ciel, reunited with Pierre, and of course, Gustave and Sophie. The picture-perfect ending that can only be brought about through Maelle's ability to paint, allowing her to recreate heaven on earth. And then Verso steps onto the stage, sluggishly, reluctantly, like a marionette clumsily puppeteered as he shuffles into position at the grand piano. He is old now, and there is a hollowness to his expression, just like the vision of the boy crouched down and forced to paint for the sake of everyone else. He breathes shakily, angrily, his fingers hesitating to play the keys in this forced performance. We see it too on the lines of the faces of the others in the crowd, the beauty of growing old tarnished by their unsettling, vacant stares, time passing in an instant, or not passing at all, or passing however it wishes. In here, everything can be made to last forever, if Maelle so wills it. She looks up at the pianist, a host of emotions stirring behind her eyes. And then we are struck with that first discordant chord, as if Verso is hammering down on the keys in a desperate cry for help. This visceral jump scare is loud and jarring as we cut to Maelle's face, marred by swirling chroma, just as we saw in Renoir and Aline's faces outside the painting. This ominous scarring is painful and uncomfortable to look at, unnatural in how it affects her features, corrupting her expression of serenity as Verso begins to play. This is the final statement on the unreality here. There is peace, detachment, fantasy, but at what cost? It's undeniable that life within the canvas has taken on another light. Maelle has become a cruel deity, with everybody existing like puppets on a string or dolls in a dollhouse. Like Aline, she is the lonely paintress with her legs curled up to her chest and her head buried in shame, the tormented curator of this false gallery of souls, aware of its construction. This twisted exhibition can only become a monument to her sins and never a true escape. Maelle doesn't want to be free. This very much feels like the wrong decision, and the uneasiness of this cutscene with its sound and direction seems to support that. Verso and Renoir, Alicia and Aline, this family feud so distinctly split down the middle, opposing philosophies battling within an unrelenting storm of grief. Each side of the conflict makes perfect sense when viewed through their eyes. Of course, where you sit is up to you. It's clear though that the choice to accept, come together and move on, no matter how cliche, no matter how anticlimactic or unceremonious or ugly, is what the narrative deems as the right action, the first step in a long, arduous journey. This is complicated by Verso's dubious morality in deciding for the sake of all, but exercising his limited agency to enact his will is depicted as both tragic and dignified. He is selfless in that he wants to save his sister, and selfish in that he wants to be freed from his own burden, even if it means condemning all in the painting. This noble sacrifice is contrasted against Maelle's ending with its somber, unnatural fragility, the swirling chroma warping her face being the most damning indictment, cracking despite the appearance of true tranquility. Her actions are depicted as not purely selfless, even if it preserves or even fabricates the perfect lives of the painting's willing participants. After all, she is exercising her very real power over them and is grasping tightly to the life that was taken from her, deciding to dream it up instead. Ultimately, both endings can be read as selfless and selfish, depending on your inclination, though Verso's choice solidifies itself as the stance the game seems willing to end on, that running away from the grief will only lead to an endless cycle of pain and sorrow. It leverages and leaves open to interpretation that internal question I previously discussed at the start of Act 3. If a real world exists, then what of the fiction in the painted world? Which is more real? Which is more deserving of your investment? Which is more deserving of your pity? You've seen the canvas serve as this futile struggle, a lean breathing life into its residents, drawing them into being from the haunted chroma, recklessly gifting them the hopes and dreams and turmoil bestowed by life, only for Renoir's wrathful decimation of her creations to lash out in return, winning ground with each passing year and erasing these very real, very rich lives. The painted world becomes tied inextricably with grief, an inescapable reality collapsing under its own weight. While Maelle's tending of the painting might fight back the rot, how long can she sustain this illusion? Would it not be better to free everybody of this cursed existence and sacrifice the fantasy that is slowly strangling her every day she remains within it? No matter how tender, no matter how exquisite, a lie will remain a lie. Just like any good JRPG, Expedition 33 has a decently meaty postgame, and having reached this heavy narrative conclusion, we can re-enter the painting and get to work cleaning up its edges. After grinding a bit more at the Dark Shore, I flew up to the Serpent Sphere world boss swimming elegantly through the air, which is a much quicker fight than Sprong, with a fun gimmick where you aim to overload its absorption attack by stacking AP each turn, a simple and memorable activity. The Flying Manor is one of the primary post-game dungeons, and it was here that, after 40 hours, the game's combat and its disparate systems finally clicked for me. The grandness of the dungeon, with its non-linear design allowing you to tackle each of its 4 sections in any order you choose, is an appreciated departure from the usual corridor-driven monster houses. Here, you organically uncover significant upgrades and rip through a slew of tough enemies, ones that have probably given you a lot of trouble throughout the game, with each area topped off by a challenging and familiar boss. My haphazardly arranged build felt responsive and powerful here, allowing me to carve my way through its extended challenge without smashing my head against the wall, primarily due to my level and upgraded weapons. The satisfying interplay between getting palpably stronger, the dungeon's visual design, and general enemy diversity in a level contribute to what is easily the most memorable dungeon in the entire game. The Lampmaster, Duelist, Go Blue, and Evercade fights make this feel like a proper endgame zone, a boss rush gauntlet that acts as a kind of greatest hits to bring it all home. With the 4 guardians defeated, the massive door opens and beyond it we find Painted Clair, the source of all the Neverons in the canvas. Though the real Clair is mostly waging her war outside, she previously assisted her father's attempt to oust her mother out of the painting by creating the Neverons, which was specifically made to seal away the chroma of killed expeditioners, stopping it from flowing back to Aline. Though the real Clair does not reside in the painting, it seems that this phantom has had this responsibility forced upon her, most likely reprogrammed by Clair herself to endlessly generate new Neverons in this ongoing war. Her unrelenting, utilitarian nature blinding her to the suffering she causes not just to the canvas, but to her painted self as well. This boss fight against Painted Clair is awesome, and might actually be my favorite fight in the entire game. Clair attacks you by calling upon her Neverons, with each offensive spearheaded by a legion of them chaining together their attacks. Learning the parry timings of each variation is genuinely fun, with the punishment for getting it wrong being Clair healing a large chunk of her health. This makes this another long battle of attrition, but one that is more of a dance as you apply damage and lock in with each responding Neveron assault. Though the margin of error is, as usual, small, The learning curve here is engaging and ramps up as Clair's health is lowered, introducing new combinations and more challenging combos. This fight feels like a fair test of your abilities so far, somehow reminding me of Nier Automata with its rhythm, and while Clair's healing initially feels unfair, this boss strikes the right balance between tension and release. It's satisfying to apply your build, game knowledge, and muscle memory accumulated over tens of hours of gameplay, and I made effective use of burn to chip through this drawn-out battle. With Clair defeated, she experiences a brief moment of lucidity, breaking out of the spell forced upon her by her counterpart. Wrestling her freedom, she summons her Neverons and sics them upon herself, their blades and claws and weapons embedding themselves in her as she grasps desperately for her own freedom. This scene is raw and tragic, but also empowering, mirroring Verso's choice at the end of the game, realizing the necessity of liberating oneself and choosing to die by your principles. As the Neverons run their swords into the painted Clair, the others can do nothing but watch on in horror and respect, allowing her dignity as a painted creation, forced against her will to wage a war she didn't want any part in. With Clair put to rest, we receive her outfit as a gift, but only one person can wear it, and Lune gets it obviously. A cool reward for a dense, fun, and reinvigorating dungeon. Renoir's drafts, on the other hand, is nothing that worth talking about. Stepping into this final gauntlet, we are greeted with an incredible sight. The bottom of the monolith with its luminescent tendrils shooting across the sky like roots, a mesmerizing storm of frozen lightning flashing in a permanent dance. This is probably the most breathtaking sight in the entire game, and Expedition 33 has no shortage of truly awe-inspiring sights. The dungeon itself, however, is decently short, regressing back to that linear corridor design lined with beauty but without much substance. The fights here are surprisingly easy, and the general layout lacks the impressive direction of the flying manor and its freedom, or even the Reacher in its verticality and length. Of course, critiquing this final dungeon is rather pointless, when this lead up just serves to whet your appetite as you come up against the game's most brutally difficult challenge by far, a man who waits in silent vigil at the bottom of a far-flung abyss, in the furthest depths of the painting. Simon is absolutely ridiculous. His introduction immediately highlights this menacing aura, literally a FromSoft boss in an Elden Ring arena, holding a fucking moonlight greatsword. The atmosphere is palpable, this sad knight being a member of Expedition Zero, Painted Verso's close friend, and lover of the Painted Clair. Though the lore is murky, it seems that the real Clair manipulated him at some point, granting him his godlike powers with which he used to fell the Axons and Old Lumiere, and sending him off to pierce the barrier to the Paintress's heart and defeat Aline. Upon meeting Aline, however, Simon learns the whole truth and Renoir's culpability, traveling down to the roots of the monolith to weed out the actual source of the gomage. Despite his immense powers, however, it seems that Renoir managed to paint over Simon, bringing him under his control, stripping him of his agency and turning him into an extremely effective guard dog. But now with his master gone, Simon sits here, mindlessly stewing in the dark, waiting to be put out of his non-existence. And that's what we're here to do. At least that's what we'll try to do. I mean, we are definitely trying. Maybe we'll just try a couple more times. What the fuck is this boss battle actually? Why did Sandfall Interactive port Consort Radahn into their game as an optional boss? Phase 1 against Simon's base form is no problem. It even ends neatly with a victory screen, only to throw you into an entirely new fight. This Phase 2 is challenging to say the least. Lightspeed attacks, after images, removing you entirely from battle if you die. The fight begins to feel a little bit unfair. It's definitely not impossible, but the sheer speed of his attacks, the precise parry timing, the spectacle and particle effects blinding you sounds familiar. And the mounting pressure as Simon relentlessly throws himself at you, it's all a bit too much. And just when you think you're making progress, you hit phase 3 as he drops below 40% health, and then he just deletes your whole party. That's it. No warning, no countdown, just a complete party wipe with no way to prevent it. Fair enough. I'm just gonna delete you then, Simon. This is the first true instance of optimization from my end, and I decided to follow this burn build I found, centered around Maelle's burning canvas and Verso stacking burns of his free aiming basic attacks, with CL as support to double Maelle's damage where possible. Despite missing some luminas, I built it as close to this blueprint as possible, and let's just say this completely trivialized the battle. This burn nuke cheesed Simon so hard it bypassed his third phase entirely, which seems to be the legitimate way of getting past his party wipe, marking a rather unremarkable end to this absurd boss. All it took was 20 minutes of fiddling around in the character screen, adjusting Pictos and Luminas, following clear guidelines, and then unexpectedly breaking the game entirely with this overpowered build. In a way, we've come full circle, and the initial problem I brought up during the combat section rears its head. This game can be incredibly difficult, punishing, a chore to slog through. It can make you pull your hair out with its admirable but stark commitment to action combat over turn-based strategy. But then you optimize your build just once after reaching the end of your rope, and everything immediately becomes absurdly easy. So then, the point in which you choose to cross this threshold, that critical moment of frustration you may or may not reach, ends up having the single largest impact on your enjoyment of the game's combat, and perhaps even the game on a whole. What initially looks like a wide chasm can actually be gapped instantaneously without much thought, and once you've made yourself overpowered, why would you ever go back? Upon reflection, I'm glad I struggled through the game on my own terms for so long, only to claw my way to this bullshit boss and finally reach my breaking point. Only then did I succumb to the dark side and optimize my build, reducing the game's hardest challenge to a couple button presses. I can't say what I might have felt otherwise, but there's definitely a hollow feeling having beaten Simon this way. Almost like my victory was undeserved. It probably was. Oh well, at least Verso gets the Moonlight Greatsword as a reward. Also, this boss definitely feels shoehorned into the game to cover for some cut lore and content. But I think I'm okay with that since they repurpose him into the game's hardest secret boss and let him aura farm with his Miyazaki cosplay. I can respect the vision and the hustle on display here. One final stop as I travel back to the Endless Tower to put this new build to use. Of course, I handedly cleared every remaining floor, with nothing really posing an iota of challenge. Compared to Simon, all of these trials are trivial, though completing them grants us a strangely touching bookend, with the remnant of the real Clair advising Maelle to make her own choices, and not give in to make-believe or fear. I hope you had fun, Clair says. Just remember, the only thing you owe them is to live a life you enjoy. These words, imparted to Maelle by the shade of her real sister, demonstrates a care and sensitivity that is lacking in the Clair we know. But it's good to remember that she, like the rest, is still human, grappling with her brother's death, her parents' toxic relationship, and her sister's unhealed trauma. Not to excuse all the apathy and mercilessness she's enacted, of course, but Clair is dealing with her grief the only way she knows how, forging on tirelessly towards a future, a walled fortress unwilling to show any cracks. Through this small scene, we get a glimpse into the philosophy at her core, the trait that makes her restless, granting her the propensity to always move forward. Saying goodbye to Clair, I then approach each frayed monstrosity at the back of the map. I look to my left, Deji, only to find an upgraded Landmaster with even crazier attacks, healing itself to full after bringing it down to 0. Guess I'll come back to this one. I look to the right, AJ, and face the duelists, literally 2 duelists in a ridiculous battle that you're barely gonna have a turn in, and then they fuse into one being for the second phase. No thanks. And then another Clair fight, this time completely invulnerable until you parry all her upgraded spectral attacks. I think I'll pass. And finally, right at the back, a towering canvas depicting the dreaded Simon. Lo and behold, Simon the Divergent Star. This time his after images are doubled and seemingly come out with randomized timings. You know what, Samfall? I think I'm good. Let the real gamers handle these guys. I'm ready to put down the controller and call it a day. I don't want this life. I don't want it. Unpaint me. Unpaint me. What's more important, essence or verisimilitude? Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a game defined by an uncanny duality, always presenting 2 halves juxtaposed against each other, alternating between them, each thread pulling in different directions. Sometimes one overpowers the other, only for it to flip itself on its head. From the combat, with its expected turn-based rhythm dominated instead by pure action elements like shooting and parrying, magnetized completely to the latter. To the visuals and world design, its beauty and art direction easily captivating but the glossiness disrupting its raw charm, distracting with its artificiality. To the story, beginning as this grand, twisting tale full of mystery before losing momentum in its transition into an intimate family drama, one that peters out with a sigh yet still manages to leave you with a final thesis on grief and choice. At times, Expedition 33 strives to be simple, coasting along, frictionless, but then it snaps suddenly and demands complexity, frustrating you with difficulty spikes and unintuitive systems. At once, it lets you enjoy the ride for what it is, and in the next second punishes your inability to adapt. There's a massive gulf that this game straddles, dipping in and out of it from opposing sides, between true awe and frustration. There's a desire to capture as much detail as possible, to strive for it, while championing a spirit of grit and effort at its core. As SKA so eloquently puts it, the we balances out the woo, and thus it is we woo, we woo. This one observation summarizes my feelings toward this monumental game, across all aspects of its construction. The essence of Expedition 33 is pure and focused, a love letter to its inspirations and the bygone days of complex, story-rich JRPGs, celebrating all the hallmarks of the genre with good intentions and deft execution. It feels impressionistic and well-meaning, and it is in this feeling the charm is most apparent. But there is also a meticulousness, a dedication to its presentation, modernization, and willingness to do it all, tangible and concrete. The precision of the parrying, the sheen of its cinematics, capturing everything in painstaking detail. It's a vanity that doesn't always allow that underlying charm to flourish. For a while, I wondered where I would fall. Would my final verdict of this game be ultimately positive, hailing it as a masterpiece as many have, or ending up as a flawed but ambitious title, one that will eventually be relegated to the annals of my mind as a memorable, if not slightly average experience? Where would this game land for me? But then, at the start of July, just as I wrapped up my playthrough and began the initial stages of this script, my friend Zach passed away. He was only 26, just a couple months older than I am right now. And in the days that followed, all I could think about was how much I wish I could speak to him about this game. All I wanted to do was walk up to him and pick his brain about it. A lot of our conversations revolved around video games, and I wonder what he would think of Expedition's story. I regret not asking him about it when I had the chance. I never expected to be on the non-hypothetical end of that grief, to so viscerally reconcile the art I've just experienced, with its questions of acceptance and fantasy and escapism and reality. I never thought it would be put forth so vividly to me. Watching everybody around me react to his death, the death of a brother, an uncle, a son, a friend, so young and full of life. What conclusions would I even draw? What would I even know? My heart aches for his family and for those even closer to him, who knew the true depths of his soul. And I wonder whether there's some truth in that desire to hold on, in a life to paint, to sustain even for a bit longer this ephemeral beauty we're permitted, to hold on and be in his presence one more time, to bargain for more moments, and rewrite history to our liking. In the wake of all of this, I don't know if there could ever be an ending that could satisfy every longing and ease every burden, essence or verisimilitude. I realize I'm not so sure of anything anymore. But if there's one thing I have confidence in, it's that Zach's reputation of immense love lives on, and I see it in his family, his friends, in those around me, reaching into every life that he touched, lighting that torch within us and entrusting us with that legacy. He may not be here anymore, but through us, his brightness and positivity and presence will never fade. And that spark calls us to keep moving with that same spirit of hope and kindness, to come together, love all, and live well. I know that one day, I'll be able to talk to him about all of this, to ask him which ending he would have chosen. But for now, this video will have to do. Thank you for your light, Zach, and thank you for being you. We miss you, buddy. Despite everything, despite all our pain, just as you want us to do, we continue. For you. Tomorrow comes.